Hello, welcome or welcome back, depending on if you're new here. I just got this new palette that I am so excited to try. So today I'm going to unbox it and swatch it out and also go through how to make a mixing chart to familiarize yourself with a new set of paints. I've only used one of these paints before, so a mixing chart is going to give me an idea of what sort of range of colors I can expect from this limited palette. This is the QOR Urban Sketch Kit. It comes with its own tin. It includes 6 half pans, mixing space, and 6 empty half pans. The box that it comes in also includes a mini swatch card and a small pamphlet with printed swatches of the whole QOR line of paints. The colors included in this set are benzimidazolone yellow, or PY154, quinacridone red, PV19, cobalt blue, PB28, cobalt teal, PG50, Van Dyke brown, PR101, and Payne's gray, PBK:9, PB15:3, and PV19. Cobalt teal is the only QOR paint here that I've already tried, which is why that swatch is already filled out. I appreciate that they included a swatch card with the palette. However, I don't like the way that it's laid out. It doesn't match the layout of the palette itself, so I don't think that I will be using that at all. I don't think that it'll be helpful for me. I think it'll just get confusing and annoying, but I appreciate that they included the paper in there. My first thoughts on swatching these are that I really do love how bright they are. I've noticed that in the past I've only tried a couple of other QOR colors, but I found that they were very nice to work with, and these are the same way. I like how easily they reactivated. I like how smoothly they were painting. The 2 cobalt colors have some lovely granulation. And if you've never used QOR watercolors before, they're known for being very flowy. They use a different binder than other paints do, which is the thing that holds the pigments together. I think they have their own proprietary binder, and whatever it is really helps them move once they're on the paper, which has been nice to work with so far. We'll see how I like it in more actual paintings. One important note I would say is that if you are trying to stay away from the more toxic colors, not that watercolor is like the most toxic medium, but there are 2 cobalt colors here, so insofar as watercolors get toxic, those would be 2 of the colors to watch out for. I usually try to limit the amount of toxic colors on my palette. I have Daniel Smith's cobalt teal on my studio palette right now, although I don't use it that often, to be honest. And my normal go-to blue would be an ultramarine, so I don't know. We'll have to see how I feel about this cobalt, if I feel like it's worth introducing into my studio palette. I have a feeling that I'm going to end up sticking with my ultramarine in my studio palette, but we'll see. I don't know. So while I'm using this specific palette, I'm going to have to be more aware of how I am disposing of the paint water and the pigments, and when you're out and about urban sketching, you don't really want to just be dumping your water anywhere no matter what, but especially in a case like this, really making sure they're going in the garbage somewhere and not just dumping it out. These swatches here are my typical swatches that I add to my swatch binder, which is where I keep a swatch of all of the colors that I have, so that I can keep track of which pigments and which brands I'm liking and which ones I don't, or which versions of colors that I like the most, because not every brand makes their paints with the same pigments. So this way I can keep track of which pigments throughout my paints I tend to like, and which brands I tend to like, and which ones I've tried before if I'm looking to buy a new one. This specific swatch style is one that I learned from Denise Soden, or In Liquid Color. She has a great YouTube channel that I love and have been following for a long time. And if you are ever interested in learning more about pigments and mixes and different paint brands, I would highly recommend that you check out her videos. Or if you like animal paintings, she's a wildlife artist, so I'll link her channel below, but that's where I learned this specific swatch style. So now that I've swatched the paints, it's time to make a mixing chart. Mixing charts are super incredibly useful references for understanding the range of capabilities that your paint palette has. They can be a little bit time-consuming and annoying, especially if you have a large palette, but they really help you get to know your colors and how they mix together. In this case especially, where I have a limited palette but with space to add more colors in those empty pans, a mixing chart will give me an idea of if there's any specific tones or colors that I won't be able to mix but that I would want to, so that I can find something to fill in that empty space in my palette. To start, I am creating a grid that is 6 by 6, since there are 6 colors in the palette. You can use anything you'd prefer to create the grid lines, but I have this really thin tape and I think it'll actually work really well for this. You just have to be really careful to press the tape down firmly, especially where the tape lines overlap, so that there won't be any gaps underneath for the paint to bleed through. And then once that's done, I'm going to add another piece of tape diagonally down the center so that the grid is split into 2 triangles. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to write the colors in the palette along the top and the side of the grid. Now, what you do to fill in each square is you take whatever color is up on the top of that column and mix it with the color that is at the end of that row. That way you mix every color in the palette with all of the other colors. So you end up with a grid of every 2-color mix possible from your paints. The nature of the grid format means that there are actually 2 spots for each mix of colors, which is why I split the grid diagonally, so each mix appears once in each triangle. I like to have the bottom triangle be the mix at full strength and the top triangle be that same mix but with water added to around 50% strength. But you can also play around with having one triangle be more heavily leaning towards one color in the mix than the other, and then the top triangle be the opposite. So for here, the diagonal line down the middle ends up being where each color meets itself. So you're just filling in each actual color in the palette at, for me, full strength on the bottom and 50% on the top before you then move on to the mixes. Then I'm going to this top corner. I'm going to start with benzimidazolone yellow, and this first mix here is going to be benzimidazolone yellow and quinacridone red. So on the bottom half, I'm going to fill in that mix at its full strength, and then on its opposite square on the top triangle, I'm going to water it down and fill it in at 50%. Then I'm going to move on to benzimidazolone yellow and cobalt blue and do the same thing, and so on and so forth. I will say the yellow-blue combos on this row are very bright, which is interesting. Not necessarily the ones I would normally go for, so I'll have to see if I end up liking them or if I'm going to have to find a way to tone them down. If you want to do a mixing chart but you don't want it to take as much time, you don't have to do both sides of the mixing chart. You could just cut a line down the diagonal and just have one triangle and do each mix once at its full strength, and you'll just have an example of each 2-color mix in the palette. But I just like doing the whole thing. I mentioned earlier that I've used QOR's Cobalt Teal before, and that I also have a Cobalt Teal on my studio palette. Payne's Gray and Van Dyke Brown are also on my studio palette, so these three colors I am fairly familiar with, although I've only used the Daniel Smith versions for Payne's Gray and Van Dyke Brown. The other three colors, however, I've never used before, and I'm certainly not familiar with how this set of 6 works together. So getting to know them like this is really helpful, and I'm really liking how bright the colors are. Although in my everyday painting, I do tend to go for more muted colors, so again, I might have to tone some of these down a little bit. Aside from getting to know new pigments and colors, the other reason that I'm so excited to use this palette is because I've been wanting to improve my mixing abilities, and a limited palette is a great way to do that since it forces you to practice mixing. If you've seen any of my studio palette or travel palette videos, which I'll link below, you'd know that I love a convenience color, especially for my go-to greens. So having a palette without even one green in it is kind of crazy for me, and like the green pigment in cobalt teal doesn't count. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with convenience colors. Again, I love them, but they aren't going to help me get better at mixing. So even though there are 6 empty wells here, I'm going to try to add as few extra paints in it as possible. And I mean, this set I'm seeing has a really nice range of mixes on its own. So I don't know that I would even feel like I needed to add that many. But like I just said, I love having options for greens. You know, I go out and I do landscapes, and I like to urban sketch, so I'm probably going to have to add another green in here because I don't know that I'll gravitate towards the ones that this palette is producing. But I am really liking the purples. There's a bunch that you can mix here that are really lovely. This bottom row with the Payne's Gray, these are beautifully moody mixes, which I love. So this whole sort of bottom section of the palette is those are definitely the mixes that I gravitate towards the most out of what this chart is showing. I can tell I am going to have to experiment with grays because I am super partial to my go-to ultramarine burnt umber mix, and I don't know that the Van Dyke Brown and Cobalt Blue are going to be a replacement that I like, but again, we will see. I can tell that these colors are going to push me out of my comfort zone a little bit, and I am excited for that. I think my only real cons here are the greens, which, you know, that's a personal preference, and also, a very minor thing, I think the half pans in this palette seem a little bit shallower than normal, and they overfill the pan, so you still get enough paint, but because they overfilled it, when I first sprayed them with water, they immediately splattered all over the other pans, which isn't an actual problem, and especially once you use enough of the paints that they get to the level of the pan, they're going to stop splattering like that. But in terms of getting a clean swatch, immediately having the quinacridone red splatter all over the benzimidazolone yellow was kind of not ideal. So maybe for the first couple of times you use the palette, maybe don't spray them, or spray them like very gently. They reactivated really easily, like I said earlier, so it's not really that much of a problem, it just wasn't my preference. All in all, I am so excited to go out with this set. It's really compact, there's a nice range of colors. I enjoyed painting with them. I will have to take this out urban sketching soon for a real outside on location test and report back about that. But for now, I am really liking this set. If you've made it this far, thank you. I really appreciate you. Please leave a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more from me. I will link this palette and the other supplies I used today below in case you're interested in checking them out. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on QOR paints, and if you've used this palette, let me know what your thoughts are, and if you added colors, I'd love to know which ones you went with and how they affected the range of colors you were able to get. I'm thinking I might add a sap green, but we'll see. And yeah, thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.